So here we're going to walk through just some of the basics about GeoGebra and what some are behind some of the buttons. So when you come into the screen, it may look different depending on what it is specifically previous settings could be or which version you downloaded. Now here's the thing to understand. If you downloaded a different version, there's a way to easily change from one to the other. And if I look here on the right hand side, I have this little triangular arrow. If I click on it, it shows what they call the math calculators in GeoGebra. So this one that you see on my screen right now is the graphing variation of GeoGebra. And there are other ones. You've got a computer algebra system that you could do, kind of like what your TI inspires. You can click to geometry where you get the white screen. If you do 3D graphics, they've now opened up some opportunities to do more with three-dimensional objects in GeoGebra. And then you got spreadsheet opportunities where you can connect the spreadsheet to what's being graphed, which has some nice features. And then you've got one that'll focus on using probability. And the tools, if you watch, those tools changed as well depending on what it was that I was trying to specifically do. So I'm going to go back to the graphing one, because that's one of the primary focuses of GeoGebra. Now, as you see on my screen, it automatically comes up with a grid form and with the axes. So if I want to change any of that, right beside the word graphics is that drop down, and I can see that the first one shows the axes, and it even tells me if I just hover over it, it tells me exactly what that icon does. So I click on it, it would go away, and then the next one would take away the grid. And then I have back default view if I have a default. In this case, I really don't. And then the third one is about snapping points. So let me put the grid back up here to show you what that means. And I'm just jumping ahead here, but put this little point tool. I'm going to put a point, just click on there. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to move. So I can move this point. So right now, it's not locked. It can just move wherever it wants. But say I come up here, click out, so I'm not clicked on anything. This snap thing, I can either snap to grid or fix to grid. And I find that the fix to grid has a little bit easier functionality when you want things to be exactly on integer-based ordered pairs. So if I click fix to grid, now when I move it around, it only will move to integer-based ordered pairs. And if I look on the left-hand side, it shows up one there. Whereas fixed to grid, sorry, if I do that lock, it'll lock the point in place. So I want to click off there, click over on the side. If I do fix to grid, or I'm sorry, snap to grid, it'll allow me to move, but as I get close to that point, it'll snap it in because it'll recognize that I'm probably trying to get that integer-based ordered pair, but it does allow you to get non-integer based ordered pairs. Alright, so, and you look on the left-hand side, this is the algebra window right here, and you can see that it's showing, hey, I've got a point on my coordinate plane, and it's giving me the ordered pairs for that. So as things are created, what they are in their equations or their functionality in the coordinate plane will show up on the left-hand screen. So if I look here, I've got options up the top, the file where I can save, open, share. The share will allow me to push it to GeoGebra Tube where I can then share it with students by giving them a URL. I can export it if I needed to for any reason. Edit some of the basic functionalities you'd expect to see within any edit screen, copy, paste, undo, redo. Object properties you can access here, or you could always right click on an object and do object properties from the algebra window as well. And you could also right click on the object and do object properties here. So there's a lot of different ways to do just about anything in GeoGebra. The view, again, just like they had that right arrow on the side, I can change some of these aspects. The options, if you see our order pairs are rounded 2 decimal places, you can change that. Labeling, one of the things that I like to do is I change this from automatic to new points only, and that's the label that shows up on the graph on the coordinate plane there, because if you leave it as automatic, it'll label every segment, every line, everything on there, and all those letters get confusing after a while. So I'm going to change that, and then you got font sizes, language, all sorts of things. You can get into the advanced, but for now the basics we'll leave alone. Tools, you can actually construct, say you construct like a rectangle, You can then turn that into a customized tool, which is a pretty cool feature, so that you could then just click on that tool and it'll automatically plot it, a rectangle, say, on your screen, and you don't have to continue to remember and recreate that tool every single time. And then help, you can see a little bit more, get your manual. Down here at the bottom, you can see that it tells me this is the move, so that's how I click and drag objects. I click on them and drag them. But there's also a drop down here which gives me some other options of what I could do. And you can always look into those and try them out. And if I hover over, normally it'll tell you what that object does, but if it doesn't, what you can always do is click on it and then hover over, and it'll tell you write or draw, change color using style bar. But I'm going to change back to move because that's the most useful. So if I go to point, I've got tons of options about where I put a point, whether if I want it to be on some sort of curve or line or a polygon, I can attach it, detach it. I can make it actually create them at specific intersections or create midpoints. So there's all sorts of options here, especially when graphing. The extremes and the roots can be very helpful as well. Under the line, I have lines, segments. With the segment with a given length, I can actually say I click a point and then say I want it to be 6 centimeters long, and it'll create a 6 centimeter long segment, which is really nice. And then you get your arrays, your vectors, and again, any of these I click on, say line, and I hover back over, it tells me how to create that. So it says select 2 points. Well, here's 1 point, and you can see, well, I don't have a point here, but I could click and it'll put a point there for me. And then I have my 2 points, they're ordered pairs, and I have the equation of that line in standard form. So the next one gives me some options of what can I do, what are some constructions I can do, such as perpendicular lines, parallel lines, bisectors, angle bisectors, tangents, all sorts of things. Again, if I click and then I look and it says select a point in a parallel line. Well, if I select the line and I don't have a point, again, you can see I can just put one right there. I have a parallel line. The next option is all about polygons. I can create just a general polygon, or I can create a regular polygon. And remember, regular means all sides are equal, all angles are equal within the interior. So, and then I've got my rigid, I've got all sorts of things I could do for polygons. Circles, again, lots of options there. If I'm not sure what it does, I can always click and then just highlight over and it tells me exactly what to do. I have my conics that I can work with. Then I've got angles, and I can even create angles of a specific size. So say I want to use angle, I want C to be my vertex. I can then say I want 45-degree counterclockwise, and right there is that angle being formed. It doesn't create the rays. You have to go back and create the rays for it. And you see this point doesn't move, but if I move point A or I move point C, you can see that it changes where that angle is. And then I have my transformations, which we'll talk about more. And then last thing are some other objects I can add in, such as sliders, text, all those things, input boxes. When you get into more advanced aspects of GeoGebra, these could be useful. And last one that is helpful with the most basics is the idea of move, zoom, and being able to show and hide. So if I want to move, I click on move. What that allows me to do is to shift everything in the screen so I can move it around. If I want to actually zoom in or out, I can click, and then I want to zoom, say, right here around this area. I can just keep clicking, and if I want to zoom out, I can click back again. Now the show hide, you can do it from the menu, but over here on the left-hand side, you see these blue circles by each of these objects, and I'm going to click back to my arrow tool. It's always where I go whenever I'm trying to do things. But say I don't want that angle there anymore, I can click on the blue. It doesn't delete it, it just hides it, which is nice to see happen. So I can just hide all these objects. So they're not gone, they just aren't showing up. And if I want to click on them and have them back, I just click the blue circles. So this is great as you're constructing, because you think about constructing something like a parallelogram. I need parallel lines to start with, but then I want to replace them with segments. I don't want the actual lines to show up on the screen. So I can just hide the parallel lines and connect the dots with the points with segments. And last thing here is down at the bottom I have is this input bar, and it allows me to enter in information, and there's also all sorts of tools that could show up. So I'm going to move this up here, and if I can enter it, you will get things with names, with specific characters, you can use those. But if I click the input help, it'll show me all the different commands that exist that I could use. So if I click all commands, it'll show me, oh, I could do an angle bisector, I could do an angle, or I want to find any of these, and they actually separate them as well. So here's algebra, which might be nice if you want to look specific things. And you can use those codes. But I can also just do equations. So watch, y equals 2x plus 3. And it'll graph that actual equation. So the input bar will take specific functions that they have as input, but it will also allow you to enter your own information. And that's just the very basics that you start to have with GeoGebra to help you get started.